Hi, my name is Peter Nelson. I am president of Nelson Insurance Advisors. We specialize in using non-woke Catholic fraternal insurance companies in order to protect our clients and members, whether it be in regards to life insurance or retirement planning. We have over 23 years of experience in the insurance industry, and we want to do business with people that believe the way that we believe. So please reach out to us at 423-793-2613, or you can find us on our website at nelsonplan.com. God bless and Godspeed.
We have some interesting news yesterday about Pope Francis's recovery. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here about it, but it's worth talking about because there are people who don't believe it's actually Pope Francis for some reason. We get this news from Jared O'Connell on X. He's the Vatican correspondent for America Magazine. And what he tells us is that Pope Francis actually is going to meet with King Charles at the Vatican. So there you have it. For those who are skeptical that it's really Francis, it's him. And the world moves on from his health conditions that he had. Although, again, it's worth noting, man of his age, these things can change on a dime really quickly. So pray that he receives the graces he needs to stand before our Lord when his time comes, and it goes well for him. Whatever those graces are, we will. You can guess what they are. Ultimately, our Lord knows. Our main story today: the Vatican is going broke. We know this. You can see it in the behavior of the bishops, and the behavior of high-profile cardinals. When they start talking about tithing, you can see it. You can see it with their behavior with the U.S. government and others. A lot of people make the claim that the Vatican is the richest country on earth because of the property and artifacts that it does have, as well as the property and the artifacts people assume that the Vatican has. You see some wild speculation out there. Vatican archives usually comes up in this. Vatican archives are actually not all that interesting for the normal person. I actually know someone who has had access to the Vatican archives. It's mostly just paper documents. It's really not that interesting. However, a lot of people place their own assumptions on these things, and most of those are not even close to true. And even if there was an element of truth to it, that the Vatican has a ton of money, a ton of material wealth in artifacts and property, the church does not have the responsibility to sell property and artifacts to balance its budget. It's the same argument Judas made to Jesus. The church should not be in the business of selling parishes. The church should not be in the business of selling priceless artifacts. As the Church of Christ, the church has an institution, has a responsibility to preserve the treasures it has, to preserve culture. It's one of the things it does, and it's done this all throughout history. The reason we know the names of many pagan gods that are now that seem to be the intellectual property of things like Disney. I'm just not even joking about that. The reason we know their names is because the church preserved them as artifacts of culture. That's why. Instead, what the church should be trying to do is repair its public image, restore trust with the faithful, who will then open up their purses to support the needs of the institutional church while also rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, and all these other things that you see going on in America right now, and maybe do it even more viciously than this. We have this news from Pillar Catholic, and boy, did this make waves when this went out yesterday. Headline: Vatican pension deficit estimated at 1.4 billion euros 10 years ago. Vatican officials warned the fund would be unmanageable in a decade, 10 years before Pope Francis warned of difficult decisions to come. That was 10 years ago, and now they're reporting on it. This information you're going to hear makes perfect sense about everything that has gone on in the Vatican in terms of a lot of these weird international behavior. I want you to remember something. Whenever you hear that the government or private individuals or corporations are being financially irresponsible in one area, it's not usually isolated to that one area. It's usually a systemic problem throughout the institution. Look at the U.S. government. For 25, 30 years, we've known that the Pentagon spends a lot more money than it should and can't account for all of its money. They don't know where a lot of it went. We get Doge looking at the broader government itself and going, wow, this same problem exists everywhere throughout the government. You can see this in the church. How many people do you know, or maybe this is yourself and your own pastor, or even present, your financial problems aren't because you have one financial instrument that is overextended. It's a systemic problem in your life. This is how it works. This goes a long way to explain everything we've seen in the Vatican for the last decade, including alliances with the secular authorities. The Vatican was hosting meetings up until the 2020 affliction. It seemed like every other week with secular authorities on their programs for the UN and other things. That took a bit of a break after 2020, but it started up again. Money is at least part of this, as well as access to the institutional powers. When you see this details, you begin to understand what some of the influence of that was. So we go to the article. Quote, the Holy See Pension Fund had an unfunded liability of almost 1.5 billion euros a decade ago, according to internal Vatican financial reports obtained by the Pillar. The same documents show that Vatican financial authorities proposed measures to address the pension problem in 2015, while sources say that virtually nothing was done to implement those measures in the intervening years. Meanwhile, the fund has continued into the red, in line with the Holy See's broad financial crisis, raising serious doubts about the Vatican's ability to pay the pensions of lay and clerical employees, meaning normal men and women who are not priests, as well as priests and bishops. The Vatican has not confirmed the size of the current unfunded liability, but Vatican financial officials warn that the situation has only deteriorated in recent years. The magnitude of unfunded liability, dating back years, sheds new light on Pope Francis's decision in November last year to appoint Cardinal Kevin Farrell to oversee the fund as sole director, and to warn that the pension fund would be unable to meet its obligations in the medium term. In November 21st of last year, Pope Francis sent a letter to the College of Cardinals warning that a serious prospective imbalance had been detected in the Vatican's pension fund. The latest in-depth analyses carried out by independent experts, meaning non-church experts, indicates a serious prospective imbalance of the fund, whose dimensions tend to widen over time in the absence of interventions, Francis wrote. This means that the current system is not able to guarantee in the medium term the fulfillment of the pension obligation for future generations, he warned. Difficult decisions that require particular sensitivity, generosity, and willingness to sacrifice on the part of all, he cautioned. But while the Pope said that recent analysis had brought the pension fund issue to light, he did not outline the size of the financial black hole it faces. Nor did Francis allude to previous efforts by Vatican financial authorities to flag the issue of the pension fund as urgent early in his pontificate. While the Pope noted that imbalances in the fund had widened, over time in the absence of interventions, internal Vatican reports obtained by the Pillar show that specific interventions were proposed as early as 2015, but apparently not acted upon. End quote. How does that not surprise me at all? Probably doesn't surprise you. They did not act on this. Don't be shocked by this. They have been financially irresponsible. Seems to be a systemic problem in the West these days. But the Vatican's retirement fund for clergy employees is at risk in the medium term, just like the Social Security system is in the U.S. The Vatican, needs to conduct an audit. Oh, wait, they did that. We'll get back to the article in a minute for some of that details, but let's go over the brief history of Vatican audits on the pension system to see how this goes in the broader Vatican financial system. All these names will be, unfortunately, very familiar to you. Let's go back in time a little bit to basically the Obama administration. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano became papal nuncio. Why? Because prior to being papal nuncio, Pope Benedict XVI had him looking at Vatican finances. And hey, boy, was he finding money being spent for all sorts of things and squirreled away and hidden away in places it should not be. He started reclaiming some of that money and making enemies in the process, coming up against the super force, as Malachi Martin called it, the institutional powers that control all aspects of things in general in the Vatican, in Rome, that outlasts each papacy. The super force is what he called it. This is where the institutional rot happened in the Vatican, starting before Vatican II and really taking off after Vatican II. To the point, he ran into this problem that Benedict XVI, to protect him, made him papal nuncio to the U.S. After Vigano, it was Cardinal George Pell, who was tasked with this. And guess what? He found money hidden away where it shouldn't be. He found money being spent on things it should not be. He found all sorts of waste, fraud, and abuse going on with the Vatican finances. And then one day he took a trip to Australia. And guess what happened? Money was mysteriously wired from the Vatican to Australia, and he was smeared with the worst kinds of crimes a priest can commit. He didn't do them. In fact, if you look at the details of the story, anybody who's ever served a mass for a bishop would tell you it would be categorically impossible for him to have done what they claimed he did. I know it's impossible because I have served a mass for a bishop before. It's impossible. And we're talking Novus Ordo masses at a cathedral. That's what they said he did. He did evil McCarrick type things, apparently right after a mass. Well, the places he would be doing those things would have been swarming with dozens and dozens of people trying to get a second of his time. I've seen it happen, not the evil deeds, but what happens to a bishop right after they serve a public mass at a cathedral. They get swarmed. It happens. Anybody who's done that before will tell you. And they claim that he was during that time doing McCarrick stuff. Give me a break. He was eventually exonerated. And then he returned to Italy, one of the worst healthcare systems in the entire world, or at least in the West, to go to a surgery where their reputation isn't great on that already, and didn't survive it. Okay, so what happened after Cardinal Pell? It was Antonio Becciu, another cardinal. And apparently he found the same kind of stuff, but decided he wanted to get in on the action a little bit. That's what's alleged to have happened. And now he's in jail. This is not a new problem, ladies and gentlemen, but does go a long way to explain everything we've seen in the last decade. Now, let's go back to this piece because this is too rich. This is really too rich for anybody. It says, in November 2015 briefing paper prepared by the Secretariat for the Economy, then led by Cardinal George Pell, the department flagged a previous finding by COSEA, the Organization of the Economic Administrative Structure of the Holy See, which had been created by Pope Francis in 2013. That organization reported that a funding gap of at least 700 to 800 million euros was identified on the basis of 2013 interest rates in the Vatican Pension Fund, and that in the Holy See's Health Fund, expenses are expected to increase to a non-sustainable level. Expenses per capita are more than 50% higher than at comparable Italian health funds. The issues were flagged by the Secretariat for the Economy within the context of an alarming trend in Holy See finances, according to a briefing paper, which was prepared by a working party set up to address systemic problems in asset management and income shortfalls, and to propose short, medium, and long-term plans to increase revenue and cut costs. And I'm going to show you one of the ways they tried to solve this problem in the most evil way possible. The briefing listed the Vatican Pension Fund as a major area of liability in need of significant financial and structural reform, including improved governance and established oversight by the Council for the Economy and the Secretariat for the Economy, and greater clarity around criteria for investment of assets and selection of asset managers. Let's pause here. Some of the Vatican scandals about finances you should be familiar with if you've been watching this channel for a long time, or others like it. At one time, it was found that the Vatican was investing in London real estate to build condos. At one time, it was found that the Vatican had helped finance the Elton John movie Rocket Man. Take all the time you need to wrap your head around why that's a really bad look for the church to be investing in a movie like that, as well as other kinds of questionable investments. Let's continue. But a second briefing document, also prepared in November 2015, pardon me, the Secretary for the Economy found that the state of the pension fund had worsened considerably since COSEA's initial analysis. A serious financing gap in the pension fund was discovered and confirmed through a means of an actuarial analysis of long-term liabilities. While COSEA had identified a 900 million euro unfunded liability in 2014, more recent analysis has indicated the unfunded liability is now estimated to be 1.4 billion euros. The same document also sounded a note of caution around the pension fund and the financial health of Vatican City-State. It is important to note that while the Holy See is in deficit, the government of the city-state is retaining profits, a briefing said. Still, apparently, solid financial returns do not include necessary contributions to balance the pension fund deficit. In other words, the city is generating tourist dollars, basically, But for whatever reason, they're not sending that money to help alleviate other financial problems. A detailed report on the state of the fund, including the nearly 1.5 billion euro unfunded liability, was presented in May 2016 to the Council for the Economy, the body created by Pope Francis in 2014 to oversee the economic, administrative, financial structures of the Holy See, according to the minutes of the meeting obtained by the pillar. And you can guess that it goes on to talk about him attempting to fix problems there. And fixing problems is where this story gets less fun. See, understanding the timing of this information, there was a deal made, the most infamous of all deals the Vatican has made under this pontificate, the China deal. That was finalized and made public in 2018. Known as the Provisional Agreement between the Holy See and the People's Republic of China, it was announced on September 22nd, 2018, after this problem was well known in Vatican circles. The agreement primarily addressed the appointment of bishops in China, aiming to reconcile the divide between the state-sanctioned Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association and the underground Catholic Church loyal to the Vatican. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, was a central figure in negotiating the deal, reflecting his long-standing involvement in Vatican diplomacy with China, which dates back to his earlier roles in the mid-2000s. Cardinal Ted McCarrick, though not an official negotiator at the time of the 2018 signing, due to his retirement and emerging scandals, he played a significant role in the earlier diplomatic efforts. McCarrick made multiple trips to China over the years, acting as an informal envoy for the Vatican, particularly under Pope Francis, and was involved in laying groundwork for the Vatican-Chinese relations. His influence is noted in correspondence revealed by whistleblowers like Monsignor Anthony Figueredo, showing his engagement with state officials and Vatican leaders, including Parolin as late as 2017. However, by the time the deal was finalized in 2018, McCarrick's official involvement had diminished due to allegations of misconduct, which led to his laicization in 2019. Basically, McCarrick had to step back because he probably could have derailed that deal if he hadn't actually stepped back. And then he was laicized anyway in 2019. The announcement on September 22nd, 2018 marked a historic, very controversial step in Vatican-China relations, with Parolin taking the lead in its execution, while McCarrick's earlier contributions shaped the broader context. The exact terms of the agreement remain confidential, but their implications. And I'm going to go to an article from an outlet that is absolutely not hostile to the Holy See and its current management to give you some ideas. Headline from the National Catholic Reporter: Cardinal Parolin, Vatican's deal with China to be renewed this week. Now, this article is from 2020, October 2020. Kind of got lost in all the kerfuffle about, political stuff going on, 2 weeks after that. But that's when they renewed the deal, the initial deal. And it's been renewed twice since then. It'll probably be renewed next year if Pope Francis is still around. Here are some of the details of this. Basically, the way it works is the Vatican allows the state to say who can be and who cannot be a bishop. The state has to approve of them. They put forward candidates for it. Part of the deal has allowed them for the management of the church there, basically, to the point where oftentimes crucifixes are removed from parishes and replaced with pictures of Dear Leader. I'm not even joking about that. The gospel is sometimes edited to include the wisdom of Dear Leader. I mean, it's essentially a state worship thing. It's not the real Catholic Church. The real church there is underground. And there are plenty of Catholics who are kind of trapped in the Patriotic Association. So keep them in your prayers, please, and keep Cardinal Zen in your prayers, because he is kind of the only known whistleblower among the cardinals for this out of China. But rumors have circulated suggesting that the Chinese government paid billions of dollars to the Vatican as an unannounced component of the 2018 Vatican-Chinese Provisional Agreement. These claims primarily stem from allegations made by a very questionable figure named Guan Wenyi. I'm probably saying his name wrong. He's a billionaire, a dissident living in exile. He used to be kind of on the inside of things in China. In June of 2020, he claimed that the party allocates up to $2 billion annually to the Vatican to secure its silence on China's repression of religious freedom, including the persecution of Catholics explicitly. He framed this as part of a broader CCP strategy called Blue, Gold, or Yellow, aimed at worldwide influence through the control of the internet, financial bribery, and yes, seduction. It's been widely pointed out that this financial arrangement underpins the Vatican's reluctance to publicly challenge that state's actions against underground church communities. Critics argue that such payments, if true, would explain the secretive nature of the agreement and the Vatican's perceived leniency towards their government, despite documented violations like unilateral bishops' appointments. And the Vatican always recognizes those unilateral appointments of bishops. Go to LifeSite. Take this with a grain of salt because of the person involved. Why Chinese whistleblower might be right that communists paid Vatican to shut up about its war on Catholics. The billionaire dissident Yue Wengi claims the Vatican was bribed into silence. And I say take that with a grain of salt here because, as it turns out, he's known to, one, be a dissident, which means that he's going to be biased. That's fine, but he has a history of playing fast and loose with numbers and statistics. But the general statement he makes is correct, and that the activities of that government with the Vatican are in perfect keeping with what they do with other secular governments. Remember what I said at the start of this. It's not just the pension fund the Vatican has got problems with. It's their investments. It's all sorts of other funds. They have such big because you almost never run into an organization that has financial problems where it's only limited to like one sector of their operation. It's systemic. So we go back to LifeSite for this, and this will not surprise anybody, I think, when they see some of the things he alleges. This was published June of 2020. Again, this is context for that pension fund story. Quote, dissident Wengi claims that the party allocates up to $2 billion a year to buy the Vatican's silence concerning the ongoing persecution of the Catholic Church in that country and other human rights violations. He made the allegation without offering any supporting evidence. Again, this is LifeSite giving you these caveats. In a June interview on that show with a man whose name, if I say it on YouTube, I get in a lot of trouble. I'm not even joking. That has happened. The explosive claim was made in the context of a larger discussion on how the party is spending huge sums of money by politicians, media, and influences in countries like Australia and Italy. In 2014, the party inside made the decision. Every year, they want $2 billion to pay to the Vatican to influence the Vatican policy about China and the Vatican. And regarding the Christian and Catholic mistreatment, they want the Vatican to shut up, follow the party about religion. You know the policy. That's a disaster, he said. These expenditures, according to the previous statements by Guo, are part of a larger strategy to achieve worldwide hegemony that goes by the initials BGY. The initials stand for blue, control over the internet, gold, buying influence with money, and yellow, seducing people with sins of the flesh. Boy, do they find a vulnerable organization with the Vatican. Guo said Saturday that the party, in pursuit of hegemony, has been investing a fixed percent of trade earnings with foreign countries into blue, gold, and yellow since 2014. The goal is to compromise, co-opt, and control as many nation states as possible, especially its key competitor, the U.S. To this end, he says, the BGY quota for the U.S. and other countries was started at 1%, has been increased from 1 to 5% over the years. This is, again, a percentage of trade earnings. 5% of their trade earnings. That's a staggering amount of money. The author of the piece goes on to give you the warnings that the whistleblower plays fast and loose with data and that kind of thing. But his overall statement is generally accurate. This does play perfectly in with their behavior, as is well documented in South America, Central America, Africa, where they're trying to buy influence in large amount, where they go and buy the communications infrastructure, where they buy the highway systems, they build highways, they do all these things to secure the loyalty of local people. And they do it to take influence away from the United States. I know, U.S. geopolitics. The Vatican pension fund to U.S. geopolitics is like 1 or 2 degrees of separation, unfortunately. However, there is no official confirmation or documented evidence from either the Vatican or China to substantiate the billions of dollars thing. But he's not the only one who said this. This has been one of those numbers that's floated around for a long time. The Vatican has consistently described the 2018 deal as focused solely on bishops' appointments, aimed at unifying the Chinese Catholic Church, and has not addressed financial allegations directly because they're never going to. His assertions remain controversial given his status as someone who's essentially been hiding from the authorities of his state and his history of making bold, unverified claims about party operations. But a man of wealth in that country has to be a member of the party. Has to be. You don't get that kind of wealth and influence without being a member of the party. He got expelled. He would know. Whether he's telling the truth, I tend to think he is. That's why I'm telling you about this stuff now. But the financial woes of the church are not limited to the Vatican. We know this. The church in America is having some serious financial issues itself. This is something we see also across the West. How often do we hear stories of the church, dioceses, typically, consolidating parishes, moving them together into parish clusters, taking underperforming parishes or parishes that have virtually no congregants left and selling the property? How often do we hear stories of religious organizations, especially very conservative and traditionalist ones, being forced to shut down, the nuns or men or the nuns or monks or whatever being sent to other similar communities, and then the property seized by the diocese and sold? This happens all the time. There is a lot of reasons for why the church is in the financial situation it is in. But the recent USAID, Catholic Charities, NGO scandal has made it clear that the church in the US and across the West is in deep financial trouble. People stopped giving years ago to the institutional church. People decided to find other ways to tithe. In some ways, if you are interested, there are seminarian funds. There are religious orders you could give to directly. It's a lot easier to vet a particular religious community compared to, say, what your diocese is doing. It's much easier. All you have to do is go visit the religious order and find out. You'll figure out pretty quickly when you interact with the monks whether or not they're on the level. Funds for seminarians, or sometimes individual seminarians, will do fundraising campaigns to pay off like pre-existing student loans before they can enter religious life or a seminary, or to help pay for their tuition. Those are legitimate alternatives for those looking for tithing. And a lot of Catholics are taking that route, as well as supporting nonprofit organizations that are Catholic that actually do Catholic things. You can do that too. The point here is that people stopped giving years ago to the institutional church. In response to that, the bishops sought other avenues for funding, including partnerships with the U.S. government. I reported recently that the bishops severed ties with the government probably because somebody had a meeting behind closed doors with representatives of the administration who told them, you can make it look like you took the initiative on this, but you need to stop this. You're not getting this money back. If you step away publicly from this, you will not be investigated. They're still going to be doing that evil work that they've been doing, but they're not going to be trying to get U.S. government funding from this before. With that having been said, we go to the National Catholic Reporter for this charming headline. Facing Trump's immigration nightmare, U.S. Bishops' Conference fails to lead. Oh no, they fail to lead. What is the failure to lead meaning? They're not resisting enough. Again, just a few days ago, the bishops announced that they're stepping back, that they've surrendered. Sorry, I have a cold. But they've stepped back. Their failure to lead is not to get political. The National Catholic Reporter is a progressive outlet, progressive in every sense of the word. And without question, they want them to get super political. So we go here to the article. There's a picture of your Bishop Timothy Broglio, the president of the USCCB. He is from the article, quote, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops announced on Monday, April 7th, its decision not to renew the cooperation agreement with the federal government related to children's services and refugee support. The decision came after President Donald Trump's administration suspended contracts for refugee resettlement. Archbishop Timothy Broglio published an op-ed in the Washington Post explaining the gut-wrenching decision. He recalled the decades of collaboration between the Bishops' Conference and the federal government and said the conference would not abandon those the government has turned its back on. I want to be clear that the decision to end our resettlement agency does not mean walking away from helping refugees and others, said Brolio, president of the Bishops' Conference and head of the Archdiocese for the Military Services. Please join us in praying for God's grace that we might still find generous ways to respond to crises and bring hope where it's most needed. The budgetary problems at the press conference are real. No one expected the new administration's policy changes to be so draconian or so immediate. Still, one can't escape the feeling that the bishops didn't put up much of a fight, did they? When the Obama administration wrongly decided not to grant sufficient exemptions for religious groups to the contraception mandate, all hell broke loose at the conference. President Barack Obama offered a compromise. The bishops refused it. The conference then launched a Fortnight for Freedom with bulletin inserts distributed nationwide. The bishops set up a special committee on religious liberty and raised the money to fund its work. Now, an op-ed in the Post, one without a word of specific criticism for the Trump administration's policies that made these cutbacks necessary. Was there no thought given to the meeting with Catholic philanthropists to keep at least some of the work going? Was there any discussion about having an emergency second collection as we do when some disaster strikes? Were bishops scheduled for the Sunday talk shows to make the case for maintaining government contracts with religious groups to help these desperate people? I understand the conference is short on funds, but also short on imagination. End quote. Probably return to that in a second. What the difference is? It's obvious. What is the public sentiment, especially among Catholics, on these things? The bishops, with the Obama kerfuffle, were upholding church teaching. The laity, while generally in disagreement with the church's teaching on it even back then, a sizable portion of the laity backed the bishops on that. Especially many Catholics who disagree with the church teaching on it don't want the church to be forced to fund things that violate church teaching, even if it's teaching they disagree with. That's the fundamental difference. Because here, on the migration issue, the bishops stand in stark opposition to both church teaching on this and to the sentiment of the laity and the broader public. Their position is unpopular across the board. The only people supporting them are non-Catholics who were never going to become Catholic. That's why. But even then, the bishops have not said they're going to stop. As I talked about, that they're going to be asking you to cover the finances for that. You, out of your own pocket. Have fun with that, guys. It's probably not going to work out well for you. Unless they found an additional source of funding that they're not talking about. Other NGOs, maybe high-profile billionaires who back progressive causes. Certain people, very infamous, associated with the political left, who use their money, their billions of dollars, to fund the subversion of society and who work against the common good, to use the church's parlance. Pray that I never have to come here and report to you that the bishops have been outed for receiving money from some of these shady organizations, because this is quite literally a deal with the devil at that point. National Catholic Reporter here is echoing the same sentiments you will see from more progressive Catholics in the United States. They wish the bishops would fight back against the administration. Part of this is idolatry, the elevation of politics to your religion. There are things the current administration is doing that I don't care for. Also not going to make videos talking about that, because why? I'm not going to spend a lot of my time on it, because why? But there are people who make their political opinions the entire focus of their lives. It has replaced religion for them. And there are people who do this, who are religious, who want their religion and their politics to be not in tension, which is where it usually is, where it should be, but perfectly aligned. Believing that the president is a messenger from God who can do no wrong. And that's a really dangerous place to go. And that road leads to idolatry. And you see this with a lot of these people who want the bishops to be out there leading the marches and denouncing Elon Musk and telling people not to buy Teslas and things. I mean, that's what they want. That's what they want. They want that kind of political partisanship. You're going to hear that here. Quote, the announcement was especially painful because it came just as there emerged a human face to Trump administration's cruelty towards those arrivals. And they give you the name of somebody who was mistakenly kicked out sent to El Salvador for that detention, that country's essentially really strong prison system. He was never, convicted of a crime. He had a work permit. He is married to an American citizen. A heinous mistake was made. And you're going to hear more of them, because when you're talking about doing this on the scale they're doing this on, you're going to see more mistakes made. But they have jumped on this as an attempt to shut the whole process down, and they just lost in court, by the way. The administration won. They're allowed to do all this stuff. We have courts in this country to decide whether or not someone is a member of an organization like what he's alleged to have been, except the courts sided with the administration in a recent Supreme Court case. That the fact that government can pick up someone off the street without a warrant is precisely the kind of secretive police-like tactic that differentiates civilized countries that respect the rule of law from totalitarian regimes that trample on people's rights. You get the idea, except they were doing it too. Where were they when federal law enforcement had agents in our parishes watching our masses? Where were they when the government said, oh, you don't need the sacraments, you don't need masses? For an indefinite period of time, just stay home on Sunday, because the big bad thing going around right now is so dangerous that you can watch it on TV. Where were these same people? Where were they when you were being told to call your bishop if a priest was offering masses and allowing people to go? This stuff coming from them is tone deaf at best. Same people are getting the vapors over this stuff. The administration is tightening up how they're doing this so they don't have this thing happen again, but it's going to. They're talking about trying to, remove 20 million people. You're going to have some problems. I'll pray that they make the changes necessary so that actual human dignity isn't actually violated in this, because it can happen. I'm not a big believer you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. That's not a Catholic way of approaching a problem, especially when you're talking about human beings. Frankie says a mistake like that destabilizes the policy. Yeah, there's also the very just fundamental utilitarian argument about why they need to be more careful, because what they're doing is widely popular. But if you want to derail that policy, have a few more of those kind of things happen. Wasn't that guy a leader of a thing? Apparently not. But I'm curious, what do you think about this? Not the policy, but the U.S. bishops with this. Their behavior in this was for money. It's clear that it was for money. The laity have for years, since 2003, 2004, stopped giving because of the McCarrick stuff, and how widespread the problem was. How widespread the problem of having men with James Martin type inclinations sitting, offering you masses and hearing your confessions. And then those same men having a weird, near perfect correlation with the McCarrick type offenders. People stopped giving. And already Catholics were pretty bad about giving. We were. If you look at the data, Catholics were. In life, we tend not to give much. The joke is among priests that it's usually about the time your funeral's coming up that you start, suddenly bequeathing the church a lot of wealth. A whole host of other problems, by the way, with that approach to it. But in general, that's how it was. And then it got worse and worse and worse. And then you got all the Francis scandals came out, leading to people not giving, looking for alternative ways. So the bishops did what was natural. They came up with alternative ways to fund their operations. Because every time the money touches these grant dollars touch church operations, the diocese gets a cut. That's how it works. Go look at any nonprofit that the church operates. That's how it works. Except maybe your sandwich ministry in your parish, because they're just buying food. They don't get a lot. They don't touch enough money for that to be the case there. I'm curious what you think about this. Let me know in the comments, please. And remember, I am telling you to pray for everybody we spoke about today. We're not having deep-seated animosity towards them is not healthy for your spiritual life. Instead, you should be motivated to pray for Pietro Parolin or Archbishop Broglio or any of these figures we talked about, the authors of those National Catholic Reporter pieces. Pray for them. Pray for the president, that he has the wisdom to fix the problem in his policy execution, because this can go real haywire real quick. And in general, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.